This week, some aggressive IoT malware forcing routers to join a botnet army or two. Google discloses a Chrome 0 day being exploited in the wild on Halloween. The first Bluekeep exploit found in the wild. And OC exploits published for unpatched remote code execution bugs in rConfig. If you're using that to manage your network infrastructure, you'll want to stay tuned. In the expert commentary, we welcome back Sean O'Brien, the founder and CEO of PrivacySafe. We're going to talk about the big story of the week, how Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, and others can be hacked with lasers. It's awesome. All that and more on this episode of Hack Naked News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show that brings you the security news each week. And despite popular belief, we do wear pants. It's Hack Naked News. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Too many alerts and not enough action? It's time to get SaltStack. SaltStack is an intelligent IT automation platform that detects security issues in critical business systems and then actually fixes them. With SaltStack, security and IT teams work together to define custom security policies with certified checks for CIS, DISA-STIGs, and more. You can scan systems for millions of compliance checks in minutes. Remediate compliance and vulnerability issues with powerful automation, all in a single platform. Visit securityweekly.com/SaltStack to learn more. Welcome to Hack Naked News, episode number 240 for November 5th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. Quick announcement before we dig into the news articles. Register for our upcoming webcasts with ServiceNow, Great Horn, and Core Security. All of them are coming up. Go to securityweekly.com, click the webcast drop-down menu. You can also you can select registration or get our previously recorded webcasts on there as well and earn CPE credits. So just go to securityweekly.com, check out our webcast section. In the security news for this week, solar wind power utility has been disrupted in what they're claiming is a rare cyber attack. S-Power, a Utah-based wind and solar provider, began experiencing a series of lost connections between its main control center and remote power generation sites. The brief intermittent periods of downtime were determined to be the result of a denial of service attack, according to documents obtained via the Freedom of Information Act by E&E News, a utility trade publication. That operational disruption makes the attack the first of its kind in this country, which I find a little hard to believe, maybe because it was solar and wind and not traditional power. The disrupted organization's ability to monitor the current status of its power generation systems was disrupted. The utility industry refers to this type of incident as a loss of view. Kind of interesting. The link to the article is in the show notes. Thousands of Xiaomi FURRYTAIL pet feeders are exposed to an attack. There seems to be two vulnerabilities here. I think there was a language barrier, and I was trying to weed through it quickly before the show. It looks like two vulnerabilities. One seems to be an API that doesn't have authentication that allows remote attackers to change the feeding schedule and maybe obtain some other information on the device. And there's also an exploitable Wi-Fi driver. The researcher explained that the devices were exposed online without authentication, as I mentioned, and she was able to change feeding schedules, not too disruptive, but I mean, you could just get all the food out and in one shot, I suppose, and do other kinds of creative attacks. They're also using a Wi-Fi ESP8266 chipset that is affected by a flaw that could be exploited by an attacker to download and install new firmware, more on that in an upcoming story, and or reboot the Xiaomi FURRYTAIL pet feeder. If you have one of those, they will be releasing updates for those. They can be bought
online from China or something like that for like $80. So QSnatch malware already infected thousands of QNAP NAS devices. Now, this story is interesting because they're infecting firmware using techniques that I discussed several years ago that really kind of scare me the most. It says the original infection method remains unknown, but during that phase, malicious code is injected into the firmware of the target system, and the code is then run as part of normal operations within the device. Side note, this makes it very difficult by the average user or even an experienced professional to determine that something has gone wrong unless you're sniffing network traffic and looking for it, because the device functions as normal, just with a little extra functionality compliments of the attackers. The article goes on to state that after the device has been compromised, the malware uses a domain generation algorithm to retrieve more malicious code from C2 servers. At the time of the infection, vector is still unclear. Once the malware accesses to a vulnerable device, the malicious code is injected into the firmware, again, to gain reboot persistence as well. This aggressive IoT malware is forcing Wi-Fi routers even, to join a botnet army. And the armies are fighting, which I found the most interesting in this article. In all cases, the malware is using a scanner to find its units facing the open internet before taking advantage of vulnerabilities to compromise them. No shortage of vulnerabilities in IoT devices, of course. The new attacks have been detailed by cybersecurity researchers at Palo Alto Networks. The GAFGit botnet appears to be directly competing with another botnet, Gen X, which also targets Huawei Realtek, but not Zixil units. That was in addition to the GAFGit strain of the botnet. Ultimately, attackers behind GAFGit want to kill off their competition and are replacing Gen X with their own malware. The quote from the article says the authors of this malware want to make sure their strain is the only one controlling the compromised device and maximizing the device's resources when launching attacks, says Asher Davila, a security researcher at Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks. Again, I thought that was the most interesting thing. Is I've seen that, excuse me, in my career in the past, where attackers will fight for space on devices. On Halloween night, Google discloses a Chrome 0-day exploited in the wild. Not sure why ZDNet was so enthralled with this being on Halloween night, but they seem to mention it a lot. They say late on Halloween night, Google engineers delivered the best scare of the evening and released an urgent update for Chrome browsers to patch an actively exploited 0-day vulnerability. They say Google is aware of reports that an exploit for CVE 2019-13720 exists in the wild. Google engineers said in a blog post announcing that the new version, which is really long, version 78 of something, has been released. The actively exploited 0-day was described as a use after free bug in Chrome's audio component. Of course, use after free vulnerabilities are memory corruption bugs that occur within an application that tries to use memory space that is no longer assigned to it after being freed and assigned to another application. This usually causes a program to crash, but if you're crafty, you can sometimes get it to execute your code. The first Bluekeep exploit has been found in the wild. Bluekeep is, of course, the air quotes RDP vulnerability, as I dub it, but it is being exploited in the wild. Kevin Beaumont discovered Bluekeep, who also found the exploit, who discovered the Bluekeep vulnerability, found an exploit when his Bluekeep honeypots began crashing this past weekend. He shared this data with a researcher you may recognize from previous episodes and the security news, Marcus Hutchins, who verified the results. In analyzing the code crashing the honeypots, Hutchins found the obfuscated payload ultimately installed a cryptocurrency miner on the victim system. It's quoted, it says, "It is curious that this publicly known wormable vulnerability, known to everyone who would care to know for at least 6 months, took this long to get detectably weaponized," Hutchins wrote in a blog post sharing the exploits analysis. Proof of concept exploits have been published for an unpatched remote code execution. Remote command injection is really what it is in rConfig. The open source network device configuration management utility rConfig provides network engineers the ability to take snapshots of routing tables, MAC address tables, running configurations, and other such things can also help improve network security. However, rConfig is impacted by two remote code execution vulnerabilities, one unauthenticated, which is the one that concerns me, CVE 2019-16662, appropriately numbered, and the other unauthenticated, authenticated rather, CVE 2019-16663. That also gets the 666 in there as well. Penetration tester Mohammed Askar explains that they've reviewed the published exploit code, and it appears these are I reviewed the exploit code. He was the researcher. I looked at his code. They're fairly simple command injection vulnerabilities in PHP. The unauthenticated one is, of course, pretty bad. And what's even worse is no patches have been issued, even though developers were notified in September. Story of the week that we're going to spend some more time on coming up next. Alexa, Siri, Google smart speakers have been hacked with a laser beam. The attack is being dubbed Light Commands, leverages the design of smart assistance microphones. These are also called micro electromechanical systems, or MEMS, or MEMS microphones, I guess we'll call them for short, which work by converting sound, voice commands, into electrical signals. But in addition to sound, researchers found that MEMS microphones also react to light being aimed directly at them. Researchers said that they were able to launch inaudible commands by shining lasers from as far as 110 meters or 360 feet at the microphones on various popular voice assistants, including those from Amazon, Alexa, Apple Siri, Facebook, Facebook Portal, and Google Assistant. More on that next when we come back after a very short break. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/hack-naked and use the code HN30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Hack Naked News. When I first saw this story that laser beams were being used to hack voice assistants, I was really hoping that we'd use lasers to shrink Ant-Man and he would go into the device and wreak havoc like you've seen him do. Like, he can wreak havoc with electronics. Why couldn't he control a voice assistant? Turns out to be something slightly different. Here to discuss that more is Sean O'Brien, the CEO and founder of PrivacySafe. You can find out more about PrivacySafe by visiting securityweekly.com/PrivacySafe. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here again.
Yeah, it's nice to have you back. And a very exciting story. I mean, this is really cool research. The practicality we could debate until the cows come home. But in terms of like a coolness factor, this is the 11 out of 10 in my book.
Yeah, no, this is the real, spy stuff that people really care about. The most interesting part about it, and the part which I think was a little buried in the article on ours, but I mean, Dan Gooden does such a good job of breaking down things. So, I'm sure it wasn't buried on purpose, but the fact that they're not quite sure exactly how the physics works is really, really cool to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, these MEM devices, so they are, or MEMS devices, they are basically tiny sensors that have a ton of surface area in these high-tech materials in a very small space. And we just have them all over the place now. They were not even a physical reality, 20, 30 years ago. But our smartphone microphones, our accelerometers, all kinds of sensors that we have are actually this style of device. And the cool thing about it is because they have such a large surface area and such a small volume, right? They have peculiar physical properties. You don't have to put a speaker cone in your smartphone, right?
Right.
It still reacts to sound. The real question is, why does it react to light? And that's the thing that they haven't quite worked out, but it's very interesting. So
yeah, I mean, I would assume, not being up on my physics as much as I'd like to be. I mean, what I learned about physics, I learned from like movies, like the MCU movies. But it's sound and light are energy, right? It seems like it's can convert that sound energy and convert the light energy into the same way, and forcing it to react to light in a similar manner it reacts to sound.
yeah, so of course, and that's how they're figuring it out, right? And they can do the commands. We know that sound and electromagnetic waveforms have a rough correlation at certain wavelengths, right? That's how we're able to be broadcasting right now, and it's how computers process sound and vice versa. But the curious thing is why pointing light at a surface that is meant to only detect changes in surface tension that are created by sound would make a change. You know, how a speaker cone vibrates, for example, is how you end up getting specific waveforms.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to shine a light at a speaker cone, nothing's going to happen.
Right. Unless it's a really high-powered laser pointer, it would burn a hole through it.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And these are very high-powered lasers. But yeah, so this is supposed to work more or less the same way on a very small scale. And so the question is how exactly they're getting the data in, not necessarily how they're figuring out how to translate light data into sound data.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's interesting that the article mentions that the equipment for this, because when you first hear of this attack, you're like, oh, this is like tens of thousands or more dollars to, create a rig that can do this. The articles that I read were not true.
$500-600.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing I almost want to just buy the gear and play
around with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, maybe we'll find some useful applications for this. The interesting part about these kinds of revelations is we're surrounded by smart devices everywhere. Obviously, I'm scared of smart devices and some of these issues because we're just putting them everywhere without really understanding the implications of doing that. What we do at PrivacySafe, of course, is lock down network layer, all that stuff with devices, but we're not ready for light. We're not ready for light.
Yeah. Well, and the other problem with voice assistants is it's very difficult to control access and authenticate people. And we did an interview with Wes Widner, who presented at Hacker Halted on this topic and did a lot of research into sound. I mean, he was reading like books. I'm like, were you an audio engineer? He's like, no, I was just reading a bunch of books about sound and how we process it. And, the thing that I brought up with him was I can't control who accesses my voice assistants, right? Because they're not yet at the level where they can detect a voice with enough accuracy to use that as some form of authentication. At least the ones that are available on the market today. That technology obviously exists, right? And not just in the movie Sneakers, but on the voice assistants in our homes, what Wes was telling us was that it can determine that, like, the person that normally speaks, if someone else is talking, that it's not the person that normally speaks, but it can't tie that voice to a person and only accept commands from that person, which is very concerning for me. One of my first experiences was when I had smart locks and these voice assistants. The first thing I looked at was, can someone stand outside my door and just yell commands? Well, now they can, shine a laser beam, but typically those systems will not let you unlock any kind of security device in your home. So
there's an opportunity here, though, Paul, and this is a thing that I think is interesting. I don't know how many years ago the Wii came out for Nintendo, but people figured out all kinds of interesting things to do with the controller. They made smart whiteboards and everything that you could just project on a wall. When I first saw this, I said, well, maybe we can actually have devices that are little mini laser devices we put in our pocket that's tied to a QR code or something, and we just hold that up in front of our smart speaker, and now that's the way we authenticate with it before we speak and say, okay.
That's a really good idea. I like that a lot, actually.
So there you go. So on your show for the first time, we'll see if anybody does it.
Yeah. And because with voice assistants, we're not just protecting, it's the same thing in enterprises, right? We're not just protecting from external threats. We're trying to protect ourselves from internal threats as well. And many of us have this struggle. If you have kids and you have these voice assistants and you can purchase stuff, right? There's no authentication, especially, my kids are, especially my oldest, is a hacker, like through and through. And if there was a PIN number that you had to verbally say, well, maybe he's going to hear that, right? So then it just becomes an awareness issue. Like, if you order stuff, I'm going to know, and you're going to have to pay for it, right? It's not just like a free thing. But authenticating people within your home, I think, is very interesting challenge. And now also externally as well, not from just sound, but light as well.
And we're going to see, and like I said, this is kind of a high-tech spy thing. We will see nation states especially. You're going to see the NSA and the CIA and all these other groups, GCHQ, trying this stuff. It's very much like something you would have seen out of a movie, somebody shining a laser through.
Right.
And we know lasers, of course, can, pick up sounds vibrating off windows and things like that. So you might find some dual-use devices for surveillance as well out of this. It's going to be an interesting world. But that authentication piece, I want to ruminate on that because I think there's probably a market there. So.
Yeah, no, I agree, because for the device manufacturers potentially to solve this issue or add authentication is probably going to mean new hardware, right? I think future generations are going to start to maybe address some of these authentication issues. That's going to require new hardware. And a lot of the stuff's been on the market for so long. If you've got 6 or 7 devices, I mean, that by the time you replace those, right, that's not an insignificant amount of time.
And here's the other thing, too. What if these devices themselves had lasers or used light in some way to authenticate to each other with, authentication information you provide them in form of some encrypted key? Right. So there's automatic pairing you can do with this. There's a lot of cool stuff. The more and more that I'm actually ruminating on it. So, yeah, I think newer generations are going to figure out that stuff. But we also kind of have to dial back a little bit. I don't use a voice assistant at home, not because I can't use Mycroft or one of the open source things that are not tied to, Amazon or Google. But I kind of just think that having that in my space at the moment is not necessarily something I need for practical reasons, and also just another security threat I'm going to have to think about. So.
Yeah. I think for those of us that do have those devices, placement is certainly something you want to consider, right? I try not to put them on closer to the doors or windows because of sound, right? Now also light. Take that in consideration when you're placing the devices. Is really the only thing you can do at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't want to be a Luddite and say don't use this stuff, but we need to figure out a way to use this stuff and use it in a way that's secure. And yeah, I don't know. It would be a heck of a targeted attack at the moment, but it'll happen. It'll get in the field in some way. And I think given the constraints that are only a few $100 for these kinds of kits, you're going to see people actually coming up with some sort of mobile unit that can do this. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic. Sean, thank you so much for appearing on Hack Naked News. Again, folks can find out more about PrivacySafe by visiting securityweekly.com/privacysafe. Thanks again, Sean, and thank you everyone for listening and watching. See you next time.